And we're talking about the new show coming to Apple Plus or Apple TV. Is it?
I think it's Apple Plus.
Whatever. Everything's a plus. Whatever Apple streaming service is it. What's up, nerds? Welcome back to Nerd Alert. Brandon here.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
And we're talking about the new show coming to Apple Plus or Apple TV. Is it?
I think it's Apple Plus.
Whatever. Everything's a plus. Whatever Apple streaming service is it. The new TV show Legacy of Monsters, Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, which is directly tying into the big, giant kaiju universe they're building, starting with the first Godzilla movie, Skull Island, Godzilla Kong, and the upcoming stuff. The thing I found most interesting is this looks like it's going to bridge the gap from Kong, Skull Island into the modern day stuff, using Kurt Russell and his son Wyatt Russell playing the same character, one in the past, one in the present, and I'm really excited for this.
What do you think that they're going to do to allow this to be a full series, though? Do you think it's going to be like a one shot where it's like one and done, and they're like filling the storyline, or are they going to keep this like underlying character-driven part of it throughout the movies?
I think. Well, they also showed John Goodman in the trailer, which from Skull Island. So I really think that we're just going to get a fuller history because if you remember at the end, it's Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson, and they're kind of realizing that like this play or this branch they're with has been investigating this. And I think now what we're going to see is more fleshed out lore with the monsters. I was also kind of stoked that it looks like we're actually getting Godzilla. Like that looked like new footage of it. It doesn't look like this is just going to be like a paperwork show. It looks like we're actually going to get some monsters in here. So
so it looks like you'll see probably, I would think it'll probably be different perspectives of maybe some same events, right? Where it's like you've got like another person that was there that caught footage of like the Skull Island events or like Godzilla, you know. I think that would be the easiest way for them to like basically shift from like here you were with the monsters, but now this is someone on the street like telling the story of like, oh, Monarch was there in the background.
Like, because this seems like it's going to be a lot more like, a company or a organization like this you'd think would exist to like collect all this data. So that's a good point too, like seeing these larger events from different perspectives, not just like the movie perspective. Because, you know, when we're watching the movie, they don't really give you anything other than the wider scope or those specific characters.
You're watching monsters fight, right?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that's...
You get a little bit of the, like, why the monsters are there, but you're there to watch Godzilla beat the crap out of, you know, or vice versa.
Well, I know they're working on another one, a sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong, which I was a huge fan of.
Me too.
And it looks like they're building up to even bigger kaijus. I'm not sure. I mean, I feel they still have a good number of possible monsters left.
That was one thing I was going to ask. Like, what else in that universe is unused, like that they're trying to bring in? Do you know anything that is like untapped? Because I know that they have a bunch of like the monsters that Godzilla hasn't fought yet, right? Have they done the three-headed dragon? I was going to bring that up, but
that was in the second one.
Okay,
that was in the second Godzilla movie, and then Kong versus Godzilla, they brought in Mecha Godzilla, which was not something I was expecting, and also at first I was kind of like, "Oh God, are we really?" And then they did a really good job of it, showing that they're like building this defense. But back to the show idea, we might be seeing like plans for that, like how that got started. Because I think even when the first Godzilla came out, which I do feel is now kind of overlooked since these other ones have come out, with Bryan Cranston, and it was Elizabeth Olsen, Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Right, because they did two Godzillas, right?
They did
the crossover.
They did the very first one, then they did Godzilla, I think it's King of Monsters, the second,
King of Monsters,
and then Godzilla versus Kong.
But Skull Island was in between here.
Skull Island was after the first Godzilla, and I remember when it came out, for all intents and purposes, I don't think anybody figured it was going to be connected. And then they kind of do that post-credit scene that shows that they're building this bigger universe. But I don't think Monarch was really mentioned much, or it wasn't fleshed out the same way it is now with that first movie. So I'm hoping now we see everything behind the scenes, because like until Godzilla shows up, no one really knows about them. And I mean, I don't know. It looks interesting. It looks pretty cool. Like I said, I'm excited that we're getting some of these monsters in the show. But I don't know. I don't know who else they could use.
Do you think it's the well's deep enough for them to continue using
Oh,
old monsters, or you think that they're going to start just throwing in new stuff that they completely, made for these series?
it seems
to
like they
continue
used some in the second one that
Mhm.
weren't showcased, so maybe they might pop up. But
Mhm.
they could be creating an entirely new thing in general. I mean, like a bigger threat that Kong and Godzilla are gonna have to throw
Right,
down
because
with.
that's how all team up or like all versus movies go, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's like you have two characters that are beloved. You make it look like a giant face off, but at the end, there's a bigger threat, right? Like
uh-huh.
that's always how it goes. Batman versus Superman, Godzilla versus Kong. Like it's always goes that way. So it's like how many people are going to end up on like Team Monsters versus Team maybe Mecha Monsters, or
Yeah,
like Monarch might even just be the big bad, right? Like you might see them
like we're
building
getting a
up,
backstory into like who the actual like problems are in the world.
right? Like they might be the ones building all these mecha monsters or like things like that.
I mean, either way, I'm excited. You mentioned too, like the budget for this
Mhm.
looks insane,
Mhm.
which kind of gives me hope for more things like this in the future. Because
Absolutely.
I think that's the biggest thing is when it goes from a movie universe to start going into a TV universe,
Mhm.
it suffers in some way.
Right.
Usually it's budgetary restrictions,
Mhm.
but this looks just as funded as a movie would. Those
Right.
effects look on par with what we're used to.
And that's the difference between like a studio trying to have budgets allocated and Apple, who doesn't even need to be making content. You know
Like,
what I mean? Like,
they make all their money from everything else they do,
right.
so they can just do whatever in the movie space because they're gonna make it back anyways because they're
Absolutely.
Apple. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm here for it.
Mhm. I'm super excited. I think it's going to be the first one that actually probably turns a lot of people to Apple TV. I understand they have more stuff, but I think it'll be a good catcher for them.
I think that's a good point. Outside of like Ted Lasso and a free trial that I got,
Right.
there wasn't much offering. Like there wasn't much on Apple TV. I was like, oh man, I have to see it. I hear good things about some of the shows,
Mhm.
but this now seems like they're getting into the like the bigger game of why people hop on streaming services.
How do we keep them here once we get them? And
Exactly.
I think now they finally figured out that like they can greenlight some awesome stuff, or like people are figuring that instead of going to Netflix, they can go to Apple.
Well, they needed a franchise.
Yeah.
And this is a franchise. I mean,
Mhm.
Disney has Star Wars and Marvel.
Mhm.
Netflix, I mean, Stranger Things is really like their biggest
Yeah.
original
Keeping
show
them
at this
afloat,
point.
really.
Yeah. So it seems like Apple now, if you're jumping on this gives you something to expand on. And if you're into that lore, you're going to have to get this to understand it. So,
Right.
good move on Apple's part.